Have you ever felt like you are a side character while someone else takes the spotlight as the protagonist, enjoying the best moments of their life? Nakayama knows the feeling all too well, but fear not, because when he least expects it, his story takes a 180 twist, thanks to meeting someone special. So, hang in there. Your moment in the spotlight is just around the corner. While sitting in class, Nakayama observes a guy surrounded by 3 girls, leading him to believe that Ryuzaki is the protagonist of a fairy tale. Judging by their interactions, it's evident that all 3 girls harbor feelings for him, eagerly anticipating the arrival of summer to showcase their swimsuits. While watching and gasping, Nakayama believes Ryuzaki's everyday life is a rom-com, while his is far away from that. He never anticipated things would end up like this, but the 3 girls have distanced themselves from him since meeting Ryuzaki. These girls are Azusa, the kind of younger person who has come to idolize Ryuzaki and affectionately refers to him as brother. She is Nakayama's stepsister, whom he believed he treated well as a caring brother. Yuzuki, his childhood friend, who, upon experiencing love at first sight with Ryuzaki, started avoiding Nakayama, looks like he is not someone she needs in her life. And Karaki, Nakayama's close friend, who previously prioritized reading over romantic pursuits, is now willing to forsake everything just to win Ryuzaki's affection. Nakayama doesn't harbor any ulterior motives, such as wanting to date the girls, but he can't help but wonder if he could have been the one sitting there with them. Reflecting on past conversations, he realizes he inadvertently assumed the role of a background character rather than a protagonist. Perhaps if Nakayama had chosen his words more carefully or expressed himself differently, the situation might have unfolded differently. However, since it's impossible to know for sure, he considers this belief to be nothing more than a delusion. As Nakayama reflects on his situation, he acknowledges that he could never become the protagonist like Ryuzaki. Instead, he sees himself as more of a mob character. Observing Ryuzaki's interactions, Nakayama notices him approaching another girl who is sleeping at her desk. This girl, who is hard to detect, was always next to Ryuzaki. She just got invited to join them shopping for a swimsuit. Her name is Shiho, and she is Ryuzaki's childhood friend. At first glance, she seems unfriended or in a bad mood, but she's always like this without ever showing a smile or laugh. She speaks very few words and shows no emotions, but despite all that, nobody dislikes her. She is just like a princess who jumped out of a picture book, and it seems like Ryuzaki harbors special feelings for her. Moreover, Shiho looks fitting to be the recipient of the protagonist's favor, the main heroine. While gazing at her, Nakayama's eyes briefly meet hers, leading him to believe she's looking at him, though he suspects it might just be his imagination. Later, at home, Nakayama continues to mull over the girls going shopping with Ryuzaki, imagining them having a good time. Realizing there's no use in dwelling on it, he decides to start his homework. However, upon searching for his books, he realizes he left them in the classroom. 1 hour later, he finds himself at the school. Upon entering the class, he is met with the sight of the sleeping Shiho. Despite calling out her name, it appears that Shiho doesn't respond. Nakayama only realizes she's sleeping when he moves closer and examines her face. However, he quickly becomes aware of the potential creepiness of staring for too long and decides to leave. But as he checks the time, he wonders if it's safe for Shiho to walk alone at this hour, considering potential dangers. There might be some perverts who would not just stare at her. Concerned, the boy considers waking her up, despite the possibility of scaring her with his sudden appearance. And now, when gently trying to wake her up, he lands his fingers on her head, waking up the sleeping beauty, whom now caught him in a pretty awkward posture as Nakayama's hand was moving somewhere towards her collarbone and shoulder. Caught in an awkward position, Nakayama stammers, attempting to explain himself before hastily running off to avoid any misunderstanding. Fortunately, Shiho, who is not just cute but also quick-witted, pretends to fall, prompting Nakayama to turn back. When he tries to help her up, she grabs his hand, signaling that she caught him, surprising the boy who now cannot believe what is happening in front of his eyes as Shiho starts massaging his hands. As they interact, Nakayama realizes that Shiho is speaking without nervousness. It turns out she has a bad habit of getting really tense in front of people, and because of that, she cannot smile or chat with anyone. But now, it seems like Nakayama is not making her nervous at all. Despite previously believing himself to be a dull background character in Ryozaki's romantic comedy harem, Nakayama's perception shifts dramatically as Shiho asks if he would like to be her friend. The next morning, as he woke up, Shiho's face came into his mind, prompting him to believe today was going to be a good day. Later at school, Nakayama is approached by his friend Hanakishi, while Ryuzaki is approached by the three girls. Hanakishi comments on Ryozaki's popularity, questioning why he's the center of attention when the only remarkable thing about him is his handsome face. This doesn't seem like enough to warrant a harem, does it? But don't give it too much thought because Shiho has entered the class with her serious face, attracting Nakayama's attention. For ordinary boys, she is a being to be afraid of, and yet he became her friend. By looking at her, even Hanakishi suggests that she is really cute, but only the thought of sitting beside her makes him nervous. As for Nakayama, it is not the case. After all, they live in completely different worlds, and on top of that, if she talks with him, he will gather attention which the boy does not desire, and because of that, he must be careful. During the lunch break, an irritated Shiho confronts Nakayama, seeking confirmation of their friendship. Upon his affirmation, she questions why he hasn't spoken to her before. Nakayama suggests that Shiho's shyness made him hesitant to speak in public. In response, Shiho expresses that it would have been more troublesome if Nakayama hadn't talked to her at all, compared to speaking in public. She appreciates it when he engages with her. Her initial fear that Nakayama didn't want to be her friend is dispelled. Hearing all that, Nakayama apologizes, explains that he couldn't bring himself to dislike her, and expresses his desire for them to get along. Grateful for his honesty, Shiho declares them good friends and suggests that they start using each other's first names. This, she believes, will help them understand each other better. As Nakayama hesitantly says Shiho's given name, she reacts unexpectedly. Her face flushes crimson, and her body begins to overheat. It becomes evident that she believes it's too early for them to use their first names, but decides to call him by his first name after she calms down. Until then, they should start eating, and because there is nobody going to the back of the school, they head that way. As they start digging in, when Shiho finds out that Nakayama always has bread and melon for lunch, she reveals that her mother has prepared a nutritious and visually appealing lunchbox for her. The girl kindly offers to share it with Nakayama, indicating her growing friendship and concern for his well-being. In the next second, she grabs some of the food with her chopsticks, ready to mouth-feed our boy. Initially hesitant, he feels a mix of surprise and warmth at the intimate gesture. But Shiho insists, saying it's rude to stay reserved with your friends. In his mind, Nakayama believes this is way too intimate, but maybe this is the norm for Shiho, and decides to open his mouth and take in the food. And when asked about the food, he just approves, saying that it is indeed delicious, though his mind is elsewhere and his taste buds seem to have deserted him. Hearing his approval, the girl gets all excited, suggesting she is getting embarrassed hearing him say that. It turns out, Shiho always wanted to do something like this, but when the boy suggested to go easy on him, the girl is saying that it would be impossible. There are many things she wants to do with her friends. To tickle, to hug, to kiss, to whisper sweet things in their ear, to touch their enormous, big body, to... Okay, let's stop there. That is just my delusion. As Nakayama gazes at Shiho, he realizes that, despite being a mob character, Shiho makes him happy. Every day since he entered high school was boring, but now, because of her, everything would change. Observing Nakayama lost in thought, Shiho jokingly suggests that his heart started pounding harder when she fed him. Despite his denial, Shiho playfully insists that she can hear his heartbeat. Thinking about it, she had told him a story the other day about how she is very good at hearing. Apparently, she was born with the ability to hear sounds that normal people can't hear. A short explanation is that each human has a different sound they produce. Gentle people produce clear sounds, while scary people produce weird noises like someone is scratching a chalkboard. It's something like synesthesia where people can hear colors, and believing this ability of hers may be very convenient, she declines, saying that hearing other people's feelings is not always a good thing since most people won't have a good sound. There are lots of people who hide their emotions, such as lust and jealousy. It definitely must be hard for her to hear all those. Despite the challenges, Shiho believes it was fate that brought them together. Sensing things with the precision of an assassin, she couldn't believe it when she failed to wake up one day until Nakayama checked on her. This unprecedented event strengthens her belief in fate, though Nakayama remains skeptical, suggesting calling it fate might be too much. Nevertheless, Shiho stands firm, asserting that Nakayama's sound doesn't make her nervous. Nakayama's sound echoes the soothing melodies of chirping birds and the serene flow of a river, sounds that resonate deeply with Shiho. But when hearing all these words coming from the girl's mouth and how she believes he is quite adorable when becoming nervous every time they are talking, Nakayama suggests that Ryuzaki is always with her, more than him. And it turns out that his sounds are very unpleasant. In a sudden break from their conversation, their attention is diverted as someone approaches, their voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade. Sensing trouble, Shiho instinctively prepares to flee, knowing all too well who's drawing near. But before she can make her escape, it's too late. Ryuzaki has arrived, his face twisted in anger as he confronts Nakayama, demanding an explanation for his presence beside Shiho. Yet Nakayama hasn't said a word, lost in his thoughts, pondering why Ryuzaki is here with his stepsister. Something is definitely about to happen. Meanwhile, Ryuzaki leaves the other girl behind and approaches Shiho with concern. As Nakayama gazes at Azusa, he realizes that she truly desires Ryuzaki as a brother, and her decision to bring him to the back of the school likely means she's planning to confess to him. Unfortunately for her, all Ryuzaki sees is Shiho. Believing that Azusa has mustered up all her courage for this moment, even though he cannot become her brother, she remains his precious stepsister, and he doesn't want to interfere with her feelings. As he mentions he hasn't done anything to Shiho and suggests she leave, the girl hesitates, unable to do so for some reason. Perhaps Ryuzaki's presence makes her extremely uncomfortable, to the point where she can't even turn her back on him. Observing her pallor, Ryuzaki moves to reach out to her, but Nakayama intervenes, suggesting he escort her to the infirmary instead, and tells him to move away. Hearing this, the agitated individual attempts to verbally attack Nakayama, insinuating that he's the one responsible for Shiho's falling ill. Despite Nakayama's earnest efforts, his words fail to reach Ryuzaki, prompting the girl to finally suggest she'll go to the infirmary alone. That's why Azusa is asked to accompany Shiho there. In response, Nakayama tries to prevent her departure, sensing that the girl must have wanted to speak with him. However, Ryuzaki remains indifferent, insisting on having a conversation with our gloomy protagonist. Hearing him ask it again, Azusa leaves, taking Shiho to the infirmary. While Nakayama is worried about his stepsister, he decides that it is now more important to protect Shiho, and while repeating again that he has done nothing to the girl, he expresses concern over the interference, especially considering they're not even a couple. Although they are not a couple yet, as a childhood friend, Ryuzaki feels it's his duty to protect her. He sees her as a misunderstood soul, and believes he's the only one who truly understands her. Listening to Ryuzaki's absurd claims, Nakayama can barely contain his laughter. Shiho, weak? Or is she so weak she could do nothing without his help? That's far from the truth. Shiho is not so fragile that she can't live without his help. Her shy and nervous demeanor may be misconstrued, but when she opens up, she radiates a joy that's infectious. She's just an ordinary girl. The person in front of him is a self-absorbed man who always thinks in a self-frigious manner. He has a twisted perception that makes him believe the world works for his convenience. He is the very definition of a bad harem protagonist. Realizing he must act to prevent further harm to Shiho, Nakayama considers his options. Ryuzaki is anxious because of Nakayama, the enigmatic figure who has approached his childhood friend. If Nakayama can make him feel less like an obstacle, perhaps the situation can be resolved. In the grand scheme of things, this is just a temporary event. He's the character destined to disrupt the main heroine's path, setting the stage for a dramatic showdown where the protagonist will ultimately prevail. With this in mind, Nakayama decides to claim that he finds Shiho cute and attempts to confess his feelings. However, her defenses were formidable, and he couldn't make any headway. Judging by her reaction, it's unlikely he'll succeed. Upon hearing this revelation, Ryozaki's expression shifts, labeling Nakayama as a challenger. Despite everything he's heard, Ryuzaki declares that he doesn't harbor ill will towards fools like Nakayama. Instead, he proposes the idea of them becoming friends. Although it's not what Nakayama truly desires, he agrees, solely to keep Ryuzaki away from Shiho. As he repeatedly reminds himself while pounding the ground with his fists, it's okay. Even if he's mocked, it's a sacrifice he's willing to make. All of this is to protect Shiho. A mob character doesn't need emotions. The next morning, Nakayama is greeted by Ryuzaki, who is curious if he had not asked Shiho for lunch today. Even though Nakayama wanted to do that, he suggested the girl would not like him to be too persistent. The reality is different. Shiho wanted to speak with him many times, but if the two of them had a conversation, Ryuzaki's suspicions would rise. That's why he avoided talking to her. With that being said, when the school hours have finally finished, Nakayama believes things will become better from this point on, and Ryuzaki will be less vigilant from tomorrow. However, he considers that there is no use in being wary of him anyway. He has always been uncomfortable about it. Ever since childhood, he has always been in the background. He could not even think of being a protagonist in his own life, always sitting in the corner quietly, living his life as a supporting character for someone else's story. And everything became more obvious as he entered high school, and all the girls he was close to abandoned him, making him live a lonely and boring life. Believing he had finally uncovered the reason for his dull existence, Nakayama concluded that he was nothing more than a side character in Ryuzaki's harem story. Acting as an emotionless follower, he merely nudged the protagonist forward. His story would be about a harem protagonist who is tempted by all kinds of girls, but loves only his childhood friend. While the other three girls fell in love with Ryuzaki at the school entrance ceremony and changed their personalities all of a sudden, as if influenced by some unseen force, only to face inevitable heartbreak as their affections would never be reciprocated. This story has been written so only the protagonist will have a happy ending, while everyone else will be left in disdain. Nakayama feared this fate if he didn't intervene. Yet, as a mere background character, his influence was limited to stalling the story's progression. Nevertheless, to safeguard Shiho, Nakayama realized he must incite competition among the other girls. This necessitated avoiding conversations with Shiho in class, despite her expressed desire for interaction, to evade Ryuzaki's suspicion. Just as Nakayama grappled with the loneliness this strategy imposed, an unexpected voice from behind, saying, "I don't have money," interrupted his thoughts. It turns out it was Shiho, who, now seeing Nakayama, asked for his help. This is the first time she came on the bus, and even though she knew money was needed in order to travel with the bus, when she saw Nakayama leaving the classroom, she grabbed her wallet while trying to catch up to him. Now, she thanked him for his help, suggesting he was a hero. However, Nakayama couldn't help but think lowly of himself, dismissing the notion of being called a hero and considering himself just a background character. Hearing this, Shiho disagreed, telling him that it wasn't true. She pointed out that he was helping people in need, which was a genuinely nice thing to do. She even suggested that Nakayama knew this deep down but refused to accept it. With that, she tells him sometimes it's all right to pat yourself, and in the next moment, she gently pats his head and expresses a desire to be the one to offer such gestures. She asks for permission, implying that he possesses many admirable qualities. Shiho intends to identify and compliment these qualities, encouraging him to refrain from considering himself a mob character. Hearing all that, Nakayama comes to the realization that he has always thought that Shiho was too good for him and felt inferior to her special presence. Despite feeling like a supporting character, Shiho's compliments lead him to believe that his significance has grown a bit.